Hey guys, it's Trey back again with another video, and in today's video we're going to be continuing on with storing user credentials in a database. So far we have created our database and created the tables that we need in that database, and we also set up our Express server, and we have set up the skeleton for our endpoints here, our register and our login. So today we're going to be focusing on creating this register endpoint and actually allowing users to register with our application and get these credentials into the database. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so the first thing we want to do in this register endpoint is we want to get the users basically their requests. So we want to check to make sure that the user has put a username and a password into that request, because that's the information that we need in order to register them. The first name and the last name are optional. They don't have to put that in, but if they do, we want to store that as well. All right, so if you're doing this yourself, you probably want to make sure whatever required fields are there. So right now we're doing a very basic user. So if you have like an email address that you want to make sure they have, you can add this into the check. But right now we're just going to go ahead and check for the username and the password. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get the username and the password from the request. I'm going to go ahead and get the username, password, first name and last name from the request, regardless if it's there or not. We're going to grab whatever's there, and if it's null, it'll just be null. Okay, so let's go ahead and get all that information. So we're going to say const username is equal to the request.body.username. Okay, so that's going to get the username from the request body. We're going to do the same thing for the password. All right, and then we'll do the same thing for the first name and the last name. So we'll say first name and then we'll do the last name. All right, so now we have that. And the next thing we want to do is check to make sure that the username and the password are not null. Okay, so we're going to say if not username or not password. So basically we're saying if the username is empty or the password is null or empty, then we don't want to continue this function. Just return to the user saying, hey, this is a bad request. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say res.status, and then we're going to say 400, and that is an HTTP status for a bad request. And then we're going to say send, and then we're going to have a message, which is going to tell them, hey, you are missing a username or password. Or we could just say must have a username. Let's say that. That sounds better. Must have a username and password. Okay, and then we're going to send back some null data. Okay, so this is what our responses are always going to look like. You can set up your response to look however you want, but this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to pass back a status code, I'm going to pass back a message, and I'm going to pass back some data. So each response is going to look like this. So right now we don't have any data that we want to pass back, so we'll just leave it like that. Okay, and then we're going to want to say return. So we're going to return from this function. We don't want to continue it. All right, but if we do have a username and password, then we want to go ahead and store this user in our database. The way we'll do this is we're going to use this connection pool that we created earlier. Okay, so we have a username and a password, then we're going to say pool.query. So this is going to allow us to create a database query, and then inside of here is the first parameter is going to be the actual query. So we're going to set up like a prepared statement so that we don't set ourselves up for any type of SQL injection attack or anything. All right, so we're going to do this by doing an insert statement. So we're going to say insert into user, and then we're going to have the values we want to insert. We're going to say username, then we're going to say first name and last name. Oh wait, I forgot here, this is the database, so we want to do the snake case here. All right, so this is, and that should be a lowercase l. So this is, these are the values that we want to put into that user table. Remember, we don't want to store the password in our user table. This is just the user's information. We have a separate table that we're going to use to store the password information. Okay, so we're going to do that, and we're going to say values, and then we'll do another set of parentheses, and then we're going to do question marks. So 3 question marks separated by commas. Why do we do this instead of concatenating in like username and not password, but username, first name, and last name? We do this because this is setting it up like a prepared statement. If you do concatenation, you are opening yourself up to an SQL injection attack. So it's just safer to create a prepared statement and then inject these values later. And the package already does that for you. So it's all automatic. You don't have to worry about doing anything. You just put your question marks, and the package will take over when you actually make this call and handle everything behind the scenes. Okay. So the next parameter will actually be a list, and this list will be the values that you want to insert where these question marks are. Okay. So we have 3 question marks. So we need to have 3 values in this list, and it's going to go in order. So this first one we need to have is this username. Second one needs to be this first name. The last one needs to be last name. Okay. So we're going to do that. We're going to say username, and then we're going to say first name and last name. Okay. So let me save that so I can get a better. Here we go. So now we have this query. First parameter is the actual query. Second parameter is the list of values we want to replace with these question marks. And the third parameter is a callback function. And it's going to take an error and our actual result. So now let me pull this up. So now we want to check to make sure that this error is empty. If this error actually is present, then we had an error during this call. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is check for that error. So I'm going to say if error, then we're going to say console.error, and then we'll just pass in the error, and then we're going to send an error response to the user. So we're going to say res.status, and we're going to say 500. And 500 is going to be basically an internal server error. That's our fault. And then we'll say .send, and then we're going to have a message. And the message is failed to register. And then the data is also going to be null here. All right. So we do that. And then the last thing we want to do is return from this function, because we don't want to do anything else after this. Okay, so if there's error, we'll do this, but if there's not an error and everything went smooth, then we should get back the ID, because we're gonna need to get the ID of the user that we just inserted. Okay, so we're gonna get that. So we're gonna say const ID equals result dot insert ID. Okay, so that's going to get us the ID of the user that we just inserted. However, we are not done yet, because all we did was insert into the user table. Now we need to insert the password into the user auth table. So this user auth table is going to be the table that we use when we want to verify that a user has logged in correctly. So this table is going to have the username, the password, and if the account is active or not. Okay. So let's go ahead and insert into there. We're going to do pretty much the exact same thing, but it will be with a different query. So we're going to say pool.query. Remember, first parameter is the actual query. So we're going to say insert into user auth. And then we put the values here. So we're going to want to put in the username, the password, and we don't have to put the active in, because if we look, let me pull this back up. If we look here, we can see that active has a default of 1, which means that it is active. So we're just going to let the database say, okay, they didn't put anything in here, so we're just going to use the default, which means that we have an active account. So we're not going to put that in there. So we'll just do username and password, and then we're going to say values, just like we did before, and then we're going to do 2 question marks like we did before. Okay, so this is the new statement we're inserting into user auth. The next thing is the list of values. So remember, we want to do username, and then we'll do password. All right. But remember, before I continue, we don't want to put the plain text password. Right now, this will be just sticking the plain text password into the database, and we definitely do not want to do that. We want to hash this password before we put it into the database. And the way we're going to do this is by using Argon 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this here, and I'm going to scroll up to the top and import our Argon 2 package. So we're going to say require, and then it'll be Argon 2. All right. So now we have imported Argon 2. I'm going to scroll back down to where we just were. And underneath this insert ID, where we got the ID, we're going to hash the password. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const hash password. I'm actually going to change the hashed password. All right. And then we're going to use Argon 2 to hash this password. So we're going to say Argon 2 dot hash, and then we're going to pass in the password. All right. So what this is going to do is it's going to take that password, run the Argon 2 algorithm over it, and give us back the hash password. Now, the one thing that is going to be an issue here is that this hash password, as you can see here, it returns a promise. So we can't just call it like this. Otherwise, we'll be trying to pass a promise into the database, and that will throw an error. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to await this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll up to the top, right behind our register here. We're going to say async. Then we're going to scroll back down, and before our argon2.hash function, we're going to say await. All right. So this is basically going to wait for that promise to finish and then give us the actual value back, which will be this hashed password. And then we're going to take this hashed password and replace password with it. All right. So now we're putting a hashed password into our database, which is what we want. And then from here, we just need the last parameter, which would be the callback. So we'll have error, and then we're going to have result 2, because remember we had result up here. So we're going to have to change the name since that's still in scope. So we're going to, the second one's going to be result 2. And it's also going to have the same thing we did here with the error. We're going to check for the error like we did before. Drop it off here. And as you can see, I just copied and pasted this. So whenever you copy and paste while you're programming, you know, okay, I might need to separate this out into a function because this is the exact same code. So always try to, you know, reuse your code in the simplest way possible. You don't ever want to repeat code. So I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to point that out. If you want to, go ahead and separate this out into a separate function so that, you know, you don't have to keep rewriting the same thing. Not going to do that in this case. So let's go ahead and finish up. So now we have this result 2, which is actually our result for inserting this user auth. We don't really want anything from this because we already have the ID and we already have the user's information. We're not going to be passing back anything from this table. All this stuff is authorizing our user. Okay, so we don't need to actually pass any of that information back. So what we're going to do is we're going to send back the user information to the client with the ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say res.send. Now you're going to see that I skipped the status, because if you don't send a status, then you can it'll send a 200 OK back. So actually, let's go ahead and throw a status in here. So we'll do status, and then we'll do a 201, basically meaning like we actually created something on the server. So we'll do a status. And then we'll send, once again, a message, and we'll say registration successful. All right. And then the data, this is where we return our ID. We're going to do the username, first name, and last name. And that should do it. We should be good to go with the register function. So a quick run over again so we can see what's going on. Where's it at? Here's this top. Here we go. So we if a user sends a post request to the /register endpoint, we're going to grab all the information out of the body. We're going to check to see if there is a username and a password. If not, we'll send back an error saying, hey, you must have a username and password. Then after that, if there is a username and a password, then we insert into the user table. And as long as that goes smoothly and we don't have an error we're going to insert into the user auth table, and we hash that password. And then once that is successful, if we don't have any errors like here, then we're going to go ahead and send back a message to the client saying, hey, you registered successfully. Here's your user. That's the user's ID, your username that you gave us, the first name that you gave us, and the last name that you gave us. So this is the actual user. If you look in the database, that user will be there. So let's go ahead and run this. So we're going to say node server.js. Remember, All right, so I put the async in the wrong spot. So if I go up here, let's remove the async from where this register is. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to need to put that on top of, I believe this, not this one here. So no, it is this one. So we're going to need to put the async on the function that's on this first insert. Okay, so let's do that. That should fix the problem. There we go. So yeah, I have the async in the wrong spot. Move that to the first query and on that callback function. Okay, and then it should work fine. All right, so we ran 3000. All right, now we're going to do a curl, and we're going to send a post request to /register. All right, so we're going to say curl. We're going to do -X. We're going to say post. We're going to say HTTP //localhost 3000 /register. And then we're going to do -D, and this is going to be basically our request body. So we're going to need to pass in those 4 things. So we're going to say username, and then we'll do John Doe, and then we'll do password, and I'll just set this to password. And actually, that's all I'm going to pass in, because we should be fine. We don't have to pass in the first name or our last name. So I'm just, on this first run, we're just going to do that. And I'm going to pass in a header, and this header will be content-type. And then we'll do a colon, and we're going to say application/JSON. All right. And I think that is our request. We send enter. And as we can see, it says registration successful. And then we have the data here. So we have an ID of 2. The username is John. And we don't have a first name and last name, so it didn't add that in. All right. So that's good. So now let's actually go check our database for this. So I'm going to open up the MySQL command line client. And we log in. All right. Then we're going to say use auth. All right. Then we're going to say select star from user. As you can see, we have our John Doe user. I tested this earlier, so we have this other guy named John Doe in here with a test user, but this is the one we just inserted. Remember, we didn't put a first name or last name, so we are good there. And as we can see, it's inserting just fine. You can try the same thing, and you could add in a first name and last name and hit enter. It should do the exact same thing. You should get another user with probably ID 3, and then it'll have the username, first name, and last name that comes back with it. All right, so that's it for our register function. We have inserted a user there. Oh, let's take a look before we go. Let's take a look at that hashed password. So let's do select star from user auth. And as you can see here, we have the username, which is John Doe, and we have this long hashed password. And remember, we just put in password. So the fact that it comes out like this is great for us, because it'll be harder for any hacker to actually know what the password is. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of this. And this algorithm is supposedly the best on the market at the moment. So we're going to use that. And then once again, remember, the active status came in by default. We didn't actually pass that in. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and implement this login endpoint, and that way we can use this information that's in here to actually log in our user. All right, that's it for this one. Like and subscribe to the channel and all that jazz, and I will see you guys in the next video.